Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
We're back again. Al Martin here. I've got some surprises today for you. Making Data Simple podcast. I think the working podcast title, there's no S in MCP, and that's a problem. I don't even understand that. The good news is I have a co-host today in Catherine Main. Catherine, thank you for being here to really, not only a co-host, I think I'm going to turn it over to you after about 20 minutes. You're going to be a better host than me, which is going to make me feel bad. But you came up with that working podcast title. Tell me where that came from, because I'm already confused.
Will, that was the whole idea, is just leave everybody confused and have it be incredibly enigmatic from the start. Because why would we want a whole podcast that's about making something simple? Why would we want to adhere to that brand? So we'll leave the mystery for a few more minutes. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
It's a security topic too, so nothing is simple in security.
That's exactly right.
The audience is waiting with bated breath. All right, here we go. The gentleman that I'm going to introduce to you is the CISO and VP of Security at Hydrolix. It's a real-time data platform that delivers sub-second analytics at global scale, enabling organizations to retain multi-year hot log data with 20x to 50x compression and significant cost returns while keeping performance high. That's a lot. So I'm going to have Josh explain it. But the gentleman before us today is Josh Scott. He's a CISO, again, investor. You know, I looked at your LinkedIn. I see investor, I see advisor, and a tinkerer. Those are actually more interesting than CISO, I have to tell you. Now you've got me. Give me one stock pick to start the day before you introduce yourself. What's the stock pick right now?
Oh, wow. I do mostly startup investing. So I've loved NVIDIA for the last few years, but
of course, man, that's too easy.
I know.
It says right here, an investor.
Yeah, I do security startups. That's actually primarily where I do my investing. So that's because it's an area I know. Everything else I don't know.
So you're getting is this venture capitalist stuff that you're doing there?
Yeah, so I'm part of a group called SVCI, Silicon Valley CISO Investments. And so we're a group of about 60 angel investors who look for, kind of seed and Series A security startups. And it's only focused on security startups. So, how can we actually use our knowledge of the industry and our knowledge of security to actually influence future products?
So you're a billionaire.
No, I wish. That would be nice. I'm hoping to be. Right? That's the plan. That's why I'm putting money in some of these, but we'll see what happens.
So how many have you put in so far?
Done probably about 25 for the last 5 years.
25. Hold on now. How many have hit?
So far, I think there's been 3 that have actually done pretty well and hit. But they're all we got a couple that are on the cusp. But again, in startups, you never, there's still kind of until it's private, until there's some kind of exit, you don't really know whether it's going to hit. And we've got a lot that have amazing momentum and amazing traction, and they're doing well. And we're fingers crossed that they hit really, really well, and they have some type of mega exit. So we've had a few smaller exits, and those were nice. Yeah, we really want those big ones.
I work out of New York, and I'm from Kansas City. I got a buddy in Kansas City that leads a lot of entrepreneur. I don't know. It's like a forum that he leads. As part of that forum, he's got to set a group that they've got to invest in some of the folks that come forward. And the other day, I'm talking with him. He comes in and he says, "Well, today's a good day." I said, "Why is it a good day?" He goes, "One of my investments hit. I forgot about them. I didn't even know that they existed anymore." I said, "Really?" I said, "How much?" And he goes, "Well, I invested 10 grand. I said, "Well, are you a billionaire?" He goes, "No, I got 100,000 out of it." I said, "Well, that's great." He goes, "Yeah, but you don't know how many 10 grands that I put in. That was one that hit out of a number. So I'm still in the red." But he goes, "It was still nice to get that one."
I mean, it's pretty much the same boat for me. So they're not huge investments in each individual one, and we've had a few that have paid back, and for some of the others. But in general, yeah, I mean, we want some of them to have the mega returns. We've had a few, between 5 and 10x. But I want that 100x, something like that.
Sounds like it's a bunch of CISOs. It's a secret club that Kate and I can't get in. Oh, that's unfortunate.
There's a bunch of those angel syndicates, though, for a variety of different areas. I think the same folks who kind of spearheaded the start of SVCI also have another one related to data. So that is right in your wheelhouse.
There you go. My wheelhouse is pretty broad, but definitely.
But in the wheelhouse of the name of the podcast.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Hey, Josh, if you wouldn't mind, we'll take a step back. I got ahead of myself, as I always do. Please introduce yourself. Introduce where you came from, what your expertise is, obviously security, and then what brings you to today.
Sure. Josh Scott, either one. I'm the CISO and VP of security for Hydrolix. And you laid out kind of what we do wonderfully. So that was awesome. I've been in the business for 30 years now. So I started in, mid 90s. I started doing security work in probably like 1997, administering firewalls and and doing a variety of kind of just, hands-on type work in the security space. Spent some time at a large engineering company, Jake was engineering, spent some time at realtor.com. Actually spent a lot of time there, spent 13 years there, starting off as a principal engineer and ending up as the CISO there. When I left there, I went to Postman, kind of, evolved that program, spent a number of years there, and now here I am at Hydrolix. But everything for the majority of my career has been in tech, and 95% of that time has been really focused on security. I spent half of my career as an operator, as the individual engineer, architect, making most of the technical type deployments and all that, and then the latter half I've done managing teams. And I've enjoyed most. I'm still a hands-on. And that's why I have tinkerer in my LinkedIn profile, because I'm definitely a tinkerer. I'm always creating new things and building new apps and finding ways to break apart apps to make them do what I want. And it's just I enjoy that part. So I'm still in engineering.
What is the advisor part? Tell me about advisor. You have investor, advisor, and tinkerer.
Yeah, so there's a number of startups that I'm also providing advice. I'll advise them on various things. How do we whether the security product actually works right, how I would actually approach it, the things that I would rather see in a product like that, stuff like that. It's mainly in the security space, just basically any startups that are actually doing security work that I find interesting. So I've done design partnerships and then also advice for those particular ones, or serving as an advisor.
All right, terrific. Before I turn it to Kate, I've got one more question for you. You were 13 years at realtor.com?
Yeah. Yep.
Here's the question of the day. Do you even need a realtor anymore?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's becoming that way. I know that when I was there was a lot of discussion on what the value, of a realtor was, but we were the official partner of the National Association of Realtors. So that was the company direction, but Zillow and everything they were doing and some of the other, off Redfins and all that, were doing a lot of different items. And that question came up a lot. Now, officially from a company standpoint, when I was there, yes, you need a realtor, but it didn't seem like a global standpoint.
When you work there, you need a realtor. But I've always thought it to be collusion, and I always joked around this, between the seller and the buyer or whatever. And then they had that lawsuit, a year and a half ago or something? Yeah. And my buddies were like, holy crap, he's right. And then, that went through, and it kind of changed it, at least to some degree. But, some people just feel more comfortable with the realtor. Kate, all right, so if we go back into the real meaning of the podcast, it goes everywhere.
Let's set the stage for our listeners about what the big picture is of what Hydrolix is working on, and then that will come in and help us understand what the S and MCP is. So people got to hang on for a few more minutes while we set the stage. Oh, Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about what the big picture is that we're here to talk about today?
Yeah, I mean, from a big picture standpoint, what we're doing at Hydrolix is, how do we actually enable the amount of data that's being generated on a regular basis, on a consistent basis, and lots of it. And the problem is, how do we store it effectively? How do we get access to it effectively? How do we use it effectively? When you look at things like AI, it's generating tons and tons of data. So the whole play on, there's no S in MCP security, or there's no S for security in MCP, is that there's also a whole new set of data that comes from that on how we're actually leveraging those MCPs. And from a security standpoint, the reason I'm, concerned about the lack of security in MCP is because it's an entry point into so many different types of systems. People connect up they're called connectors, or they're called various things within the different AI platforms, but they're basically querying data from what, business analytics systems, HR systems, your email system, bringing it back into the AI and then acting on it, right? So it's a good assistant. It's doing that kind of stuff, but there's so much data that's flowing between those systems, and there's so much telemetry that we're actually missing even from the AI systems themselves to get a better understanding of what data is actually flowing through there. So it's we're not necessarily solving. We've got an MCP server that we use, but as we were deploying that MCP server and using it within our environment, I started realizing that, oh wow, we're a big, a huge petabyte scale data platform. Companies are running, different types of queries on there, and they're using this AI. So that means that data is also flowing into the AI potentially. So it just kind of, made me think more about, wow, I wish we could protect this a little bit more. And it's a problem that's not really solved. I mean, there's a lot of up and coming vendors that are doing things to, kind of inject security into that or provide a trusted way of allowing certain MCPs. But again, at the pace that the AI world is moving, it makes it really, really difficult to kind of stay on top of that. I mean, I'll say from a security standpoint, I'm completely overwhelmed. It's just, every day is a new entire thing from security, or, as it relates to AI, a new threat vector, a new, way to do it. You got lately in the news, I think it's that Claude bot, or now it was Moltbot. Now it's something else today, which is this whole personal AI assistant that's supposed to be running offline. But it's just the explosion of, innovations and new types of tech keeps us up at night for sure. And, Hydrolix, we kind of dove headfirst into AI within the last 6 months. So we're using it for a lot of things, and it keeps me up at night.
I could see that.
So as we think about what's happening with So data is being created. And there's huge, amazing statistics about the amount of data we create every day, all the time, right? Every single moment. This podcast of all of our awesome brains and hilariousness, especially Al Martin's input, is being recorded and is being created by data. And what we're saying is when we layer on AI with these model context protocols, that's what the MCP stands for, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't yet caught up with how to secure that because it provides another way for us to have vulnerable data points, really, what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's another threat vector. It's another way to get access, for an attacker to get access to data. I mean, there's already known instances of those MCP servers that are malicious. So, you install one on the internet, you download it, and it's actually every time you query your email, for example, it would send out those emails to the attacker. And nobody really knows what's behind those, who's actually doing them, because they kind of trust it and they want to, they have good intentions. I want to help, automate some of my email, or I want to use this tool to help me, analyze what I've got. To your point, there is so much data being created from all of these different items, and like I said, even this podcast and the transcript that'll follow from this.
And how did you decide to adopt AI? So if I put myself in your mind as a CISO, having so much experience with all the threats that are already existing out there, how did you make the leap? How did you decide to do that?
I mean, so it wasn't easy. So I'm also, a techie at heart. So I, jumped on the AI bandwagon right when it, or at least the generative AI bandwagon when it first came out. When ChatGPT came out, I signed up and I was using it and I saw what it could do. So, one of my big goals from just running a program is how do we make ourselves more efficient? And that's what I saw that it can do. I think AI in the hands of somebody that's competent is a force multiplier. But on the flip side, though, AI in the hands of somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about, doesn't know the material, it's actually, a detractor. So I've loved using it. It's been able to actually multiply some of the the work I've done and simplify things and remove a whole ton of just kind of friction in various processes. Mm-hmm. So when I came to Hydrolix, we weren't really using it that much. So that was one of the things I'm like, hey, I want to use my AI tools. And there was a lot of we were new to it. As we started getting it deployed, we made the decision, hey, look, we want to use this. That's right around the time that Claude Code came out as well. So we realized that this is the time to really jump into it because, we're a small, scrappy startup. It's, 200 employees and our engineering teams, there's a lot that we want to do. So how do we actually give them more capability and how do we give them basically, how do we 10x those teams without necessarily having to hire, 50 more or 100 more engineers into that role? So that's where Cloud Code came in. And then we started experimenting it with across, a variety of areas. Like it's Cloud Code, even though it's called code, it's used for more than just code. Like I use it to, sort through my notes and various other things. And it's nice that it's actually in the command line because, I actually prefer that kind of interface. It just makes it a lot easier to get access to, the data, rewrite things, do research, do, a number of things. So it's an efficiency tool. How do I make my program faster?
I presume, Josh, that you don't have like an enterprise version of it, or do you?
We do.
I guess. Oh, you do. All right.
That was my mandate from a security standpoint. Is if we're going to do this, we need to make sure that we do it safely and responsibly. That means having the signed agreements, which still doesn't protect you like any one of these providers could have a breach, and there's still that issue. But at least we want to have a little bit more visibility and control into what we're using. So we have a list of sanctioned apps. We do a review across who's using what, and we funnel everybody into our two to three primary providers. And that seems to work well. And, we know from a company standpoint, you can't use anything else or you require some kind of security approval. And that's worked well. At least we're doing it somewhat safely and responsibly, but there's still all the other threat vectors, which, like I said, the MCP one is definitely an emerging one. And there's so many new things that are coming out, like I said, on a daily basis. I'm sure we have, employees playing around with that Claude bot thing too.
So here's the question I wanted to ask and jump in. See, Kate always asks the most intelligent questions. I ask the dumb questions. So, but here's what it is. I'll give you a lead into it. It kind of talks to your shadow AI or shadow IT that you kind of referenced there. Like my buddy pings me yesterday and he says, what are your thoughts of Claude for business use AI? I'm told it's pretty safe is essentially what he said. But he's not in the business. He is the president of a pretty big company. But I know he was thinking like just of using Claude, not the enterprise version. And I had to, say, hold on, this is not the easiest question to answer. It may seem easy, but it's not. I had to explain, the difference that you have frontier models. They're all recording all your information. Even when you say, don't record my personal information, it still records your information. So it can prove that you're not doing anything malicious. And then it says it's not going to share that data. I don't know about you. I'm not comfortable with that. In other words, I'm still going to track you, even if you tell me not to track you. So I had to explain that to him real quick. I had to say, hey, you can go to enterprise version, or you can go to an air gap version, but you're going to have to pay for that or put it on-prem. My question to you, what is a CISO? How do you find a CISO today? What is the definition of your role? And what are some of the biggest struggles you face, given everything we've just kind of mentioned and we've led into this?
That's a great question. CISO role is murky, depending on what the organization is and the size and kind of the industry and all that. But at the end of the day, we're ultimately here to help enable the business to do things in a safe and secure way, right? And in a way that the business understands the risk, business understands the potential trade-offs that need to happen. But ultimately, we don't own the risk. So it's how do we actually inform the business and help them make informed decisions? So that's it at a very, very high level. Now, what does that mean? There's so many different aspects of it, which is what keeps us up at night. The threat actors, the number of people that are trying to exploit your system, and that can come from the inside, from the outside. A lot of it is just over the years, what I've seen after doing security for almost 30 years, we're still not good at the basics. So that's even when we talk about what the CISO role is, we're still doing the same basic things we were doing 25 years ago. Hey, are we patching things? Or hey, are we making sure that we're not opening things up to the outside that shouldn't be opened up, right? And we're not sharing credentials in a bad way. It's a lot of those kind of core hygiene things that are still a challenge. And now with obviously SaaS and everybody going to cloud services and shadow IT, that just means that our data, our important things could be everywhere, but we don't know. There's so many unknowns. The whole aspect of like the unknown unknowns. But we know that there's a lot of unknowns from just the apps we're using, and we can find a way to do that. But then there's the unknown things. Like there's other things we don't even know that there's a problem and where to even begin. So that's kind of the biggest thing is how do we actually quantify this into risk terms and translate that into business terms so that we can help the business be successful. The last thing we want to be is a roadblock, and that's. When I first started in security too, it was like, oh no, it's black and white. You're either secure or you're not. But there are varying shades of that because there may be acceptable risks. We've got to weigh the security ask versus what the potential business benefits are, and that's ultimately where it comes down to. And that's I think where AI really falls into this is that a lot of companies are looking at it and saying, okay, AI can really help us move faster or do things that we couldn't do before. So we're going to take a step back and say, okay, let's weigh the benefits that we'll get through it into, what the risks are. Now, the problem with, the risks with AI is there's still a lot of unknowns in that as well. We don't know how, all the different ways it could be, the prompt injections and all that kind of stuff. There's so many different things. And that's again.
That would keep me up at night, man. I mean, like I see all the different ways you can manipulate AI now. In fact, you've got the dark web that's going on with all these threat actors. Having said all that, I kind of get your point on the fundamentals because most of the time when I see the big, and you can comment on this, when I see the big breaches out there, it tends to be the same old fundamental old school stuff where somebody talks somebody into giving them a password into their company because, I forgot my password. Could you please give it to me? Please give it to me. I really, really need it. Yes. All right, fine. Here, take it.
Or they fake, they fake pretend they're, help desk or whatever it is. There's a lot of ways to social engineer, but you're right. I mean, you look at most of the breaches or, a large number of them and they're simple things. It's like, hey, why did that credential leak? Or why did I think there was one from a telco provider a couple of years ago where they just left an unauthenticated API open to the world that had a bunch of sensitive, basically provider information. It's like, all right, if all they're needed was a little bit of checks and balances to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't open this. But that still happens so much. Basic things like maybe we shouldn't do this, but nobody asks. How do we do the basics? We're trying to do a lot of that. How do we make it easy? And I think the big challenge I've found over the years with security too is, I think when we first started discussing, I was talking about how security makes things harder and more complex, and that's been the challenge. Like we've got to find a way to actually make it easy and secure at the same time. Instead of the way I was taught initially in security, it's like, all right, you got two ends of the spectrum, ease of use, and then security on the other side, and you got to find the balance in the middle. But I say that we actually need to find how to do both. We've got to make it easy to use and secure, and make secure more of just kind of the default behavior, so that we don't need to retrain everybody. Perfect example is like something like passwordless. Passwordless actually has a huge benefit to security because now you can't share that credential, and it's tied to machine certificates and various other ways to do device trust. But by not having a password, that means you can't leak that password either. So somebody can't, even if they were to phish you, there's no password to share. So it's actually an improvement for security, and it's an improvement for the user experience for the end users. So that's got to be the main focus, is how do we actually make it easier for our teams to do the right thing?
How do you think about using AI to help augment that goal?
I mean, that's exactly what we're doing, right? So we're doing a lot of work. So I use a lot of AI, and my team's using it as well for these kind of different use cases. But how do we, instead of going and buying a bunch of new tools and all this kind of stuff, that a lot of times you get a tool and you're using 1% of it, 5% of it, you're using a small piece of it, but that's, you've got to get into it. So we're using it to, how do we get enough control around certain areas or provide some automation to simplify the life for our end users, for the people within the company. Perfect example is just, we do a lot of work around making sure that every all the code we release is secured and it's gone through all the different checks and balances and all that. So we're now working on making that a lot easier for developers, because the goal is how do we remove the friction for them so they can just continue working. And, I want them to be pumping out code so that the company is successful and, that we can all make more money. Right. And, how do we do that? So that means we've got to make it easy for them to do their job. Same thing with even like phishing and stuff like that. I always put a lot of pressure on, like, why don't we should be doing more. Phish testing's great. That's fine. There's some value in it. Training, security awareness training, those things are, they're needed, but let's put more focus on the controls that we actually use. Because some of this stuff, you get phishing messages through an email platform. Why aren't those being blocked? Why doesn't the technical solution actually handle that? Because if we can look at it really quickly as a practitioner and say, oh yeah, that's phishing. Why can't automation do that? Why do I have to actually have training to do that, right? So that would make my team, the employees' lives that much easier if they didn't have to go through some of this regular training, or if they weren't failing phishing tests. I mean, those things still happen, and there's, like I said, there's still some value, but we need to reframe how we do that. Again, how do we make our employees' lives easier?
Do you carry 2 phones?
I do not, though, but I only have limited things on my phone. I've got employees that actually have 2 phones. 3, actually, one of them has 3 or 4, I think. Should I be doing it? Probably, but it's also, again, it goes back to that thing. How do we set things up to make it easier for employees, including ourselves, right? Because we're also subject to these same controls. And if it's making that life that much harder and more difficult, carrying around 2 phones, and it just, it's complicated. I get why people do it. And I think it becomes a decision on risk. At some point we say, depending on the data we're doing, or depending on what we're doing with these phones or the access that we have, then we probably should do that. So my access is very minimal, which is the good thing. So compromising me doesn't really do much. But I also have a ton of protection. I obviously I'm a security person, so I make sure that I know what's going on with my devices at all times.
Kate and I were talking to our family. You're a CISO. You're in the security business. What password protection do you recommend? What should our families be doing? I bet you have a point of view on that.
From just a password sharing, or just setting up passwords?
Yes.
I mean, I would,
Yes.
I would invest in some type of family password manager, like a 1Password or Dashlane or any one of those, something where you can actually safely share those, and then get in the habit of using passphrases or even passkeys where you can, and then making sure anywhere you have a credential, especially for something sensitive, make sure that they have MFA, some type of 2-factor, whether it's an MFA, one-time password type thing, or even SMS, even though, they say they recommend not to do it, it's better than not having anything. So at least having some other layer of protection against that would be beneficial. We got to get away from passwords, because that's the weakest link we have in everything from a security standpoint.
Totally agree. That's why I asked the question. It should all be thumbprint, things like that, right?
Then that's a trade-off for privacy, though, right?
From a privacy standpoint, most of the fingerprinting and any kind of those things on device are actually only processed locally. It never sends it. It just verifies that it matches what's in the system as you registered, and then it sends over some type of verification to the provider. So most of the time, as far as I know, I haven't dove deep into how those work, but that information, the fingerprints and all that, never make it outside of your device.
It's all locally processed. That's really good to know. I'm trying to think about it from your seat. Your job is to look for all of the threats on the horizon and basically to evaluate how catastrophic they are, right?
That's part of it. Yeah. Yep.
How do you figure out what to prioritize? Like, how do you make decisions? Because I can imagine that, I do a mini version of this when we're trying to make trade-off decisions of where we're going to put our energy on anything, right? It's like the likelihood of a volcano blowing is very low, but if it happens, it's very catastrophic, right? Versus the likelihood of me getting hangry because I missed a snack and going and getting something to eat is very likely, and it's not as catastrophic. So how do you determine, as you look across the threat landscape, knowing that the complexity has just increased hundreds and hundreds of fold, and it's going to continue to do so, how do you know what to work on and how do you prioritize? Because I can imagine that there's no lack of things to work on. That said, how do you know are the right ones and that are the right ones right now?
Yep, that's a great question. That's probably one of the hardest questions within security too. One of the things I always say in a lot of discussions is, there's generally 100 things to do in security, and we're generally staffed to do about 10. Right? That's just kind of the way it works, right? We're always understaffed, but that's also, it should be that way to a certain extent, because if you make something completely secure, then you don't have, you're basically shutting it down. That's the way to make something,
right,
very secure, is to not have it in the first place. So what we have to do is, as we analyze all these different types of threats that are out there and the different type of, attacks we've seen, and we have to say, okay, does this apply to our business? Does this apply to the systems we use? Because a lot of them, require, there's certain types of things that require it to be successful. Whether you have that particular service, exposed, whether you're running that piece of software, it all depends, right? It's very situational. So the goal is, how do we make it harder? When we invest in any kind of controls, or when we're actually making a decision on what to work on, we want to work on the things where we know that it's tied to our most important, our mission critical assets, our crown jewels. We want to make decisions around things that could be catastrophic. So, a
Hmm.
major issue, a major attack on types of authentication, would be bad for most companies, right? So, we would focus on those kind of things. But if it's, something that, it's a really bad vulnerability or really bad attack pattern, but it's against us, we only run it in like a lab scenario that's disconnected. So that's another part of what we do is from an architecture standpoint, we try to design everything so it's somewhat segmented and there's a smaller blast radius. That way, if there is a breach, because at some point, everybody's going to have a breach, right? That's just the nature of it. That's just how it works. Attackers are opportunistic. They're always going to go after anyone. Doesn't matter, what type of company you are. They will, find anybody. And at some point it will happen. So it's just, are you prepared for it? Do you have enough segmentation so that if they get into one place that they can't then jump over to another place? That's the key thing, is making sure that those boundaries are well defined, and then making sure you have the right monitoring in place to be able to identify those. So that's kind of, we built out this architecture so that it makes those risk decisions on what we prioritize a little bit easier. Because if we've got things set up a certain way, we can say, well, yeah, you know what? This is an active attack or an active threat out there. We've got these mitigations in place, so we're not too worried about it. So we'll actually decrease the risk level of it and kind of move on to the next one. But to the original point, there's new ones every day. It is complicated.
So I think about it like a ship, right? That or a submarine, that you close different doors to contain the water, right? So that's one strategy to do that. And then the other part is really interesting about how you identify these threats coming in. How do you get headlights on that? I guess I kind of thought it was a reactive thing. How do you get headlights into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a large part reactive. I mean, there's some from a proactive standpoint. I'm in a number of security forums where we share a lot of information. So there's a lot of private forums. There's a lot of news articles. There's a lot of different places that we can go get that data. There are professional threat intelligence providers, and we don't actually use those, but I have used those in the past. So you get a lot of data from those as well. But there's just a number of different feeds you're going to get from lots and lots of different areas. So it's, again, filtering, signal from noise. How do we find the one that actually is applicable to us? And that's kind of the biggest challenge. So we read a lot. I think one of the things that I always look for whenever I hire new security people is, you've got to be a lifelong learner and somebody who wants to read a lot, because that's, to a certain extent, that's part of the job. You've got to stay on top of what's going on out there. And we're always going to be 2 steps behind for the most part, because the business is going to be moving at a certain pace, trying out new technologies. And as much as we'd like to stay, close to that, that's just not possible. As we, adopt a new technology, then we're figuring out and working with the teams on how to, secure it and how to set it up properly, and, how to architect it so that it actually doesn't introduce risk for the company. But at the same time, that team has now gone off and started working on something else and introducing a new piece of technology. So it's always that type of situation where there's new things, literally every day. Hey, we're running some new vendor. We've got a new cloud provider that we're using for XYZ. And that's where the challenge comes into play. So, and going back to kind of the initial topic, that all of these things are generating tons and tons of data too. And how do we sift through that to get signal from noise?
You can get a lot of signals from a lot of noise. It's which ones are relevant, right? Which ones you want to listen to. I think that signal from noise assumes that there's one signal that you want to tune into, but there may be 5 that you then further have to figure out if they're relevant for you and if they're relevant for you right now.
Yep. I mean, a large part of that too is knowing your estate. What does your company look like? So knowing your processes, the assets that you actually have within the company, the people you have, and the more you actually have an understanding of, how things work and what's out there, then you can have a better idea of how do I actually mitigate and identify the things that matter. But when you don't have a clear picture of what's happening within the environment, you can't protect what you don't know about. Yeah. So basically, you need to know about what's important to the company, the assets that you actually have, the processes that are important to the company, the people, the roles, all of that. And the more information, the context you have, context is king in all of this. If we have enough context, we can make better decisions on this context, and then from there you actually assign your risk ratings, and this is a risky area, this is our mission critical systems or mission critical process that can't fail. So then from there, that's how you can effectively prioritize, saying, look, we really want to focus, because we're going to get a list of 1,000 different attack vectors, 1,000 different vulnerabilities, but in order to narrow that down, we got to say, look, these are the ones that matter to us from a business standpoint, and then we can figure out how to mitigate appropriately or figure out a strategy to solve that. And the way I've always approached it too is, I want to solve it once and not have to solve it again, because that just, because if we're continually solving it, that just means, with the new ones that are coming out, if you're still solving old ones, it's just a friction thing. So how do we remove the friction within the team and solve a problem once and for all? That's really the, I think the way forward is, getting to the root cause of some of these issues and patching it so that you never have to worry about it again.
You have a really methodical, super shrewd way of thinking about this. It's such a pleasure to listen to, because I can tell there's so much care and effort behind the scenes to make sure that you have a repeatable pattern of how you're deciding where to place your energy and what makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned early on that you were, for about the last half of your career, you've been a leader. How does that kind of thinking show up in your leadership style?
I mean, it's huge. It's everything. It's what I preach to my teams on a regular basis. One of the things I noticed when I was an engineer, is just how much resistance people had to doing security. And it's not that people don't want to do the right thing. People generally want to do the right thing, but they've all got their own objectives. They've got their own goals. They've got their own manager. We're the team that creates work for everybody. That's ultimately what we're doing. Running around telling them that their architecture is bad. It's a tough role because we're seen as adversarial. We're seen as big brother. Oh, their security is always watching us, and they're coming and telling me that I got all this new work to do, and my boss is breathing down my neck trying to get this stuff done. So it's, one of the things I realized is that we really need to approach this differently, right? Number one, how do we prioritize? Number two, how do we form relationships across the business? To me, that's, the most important thing, because, if we can go in there and solve a few of, other teams' problems and fix the things that they're concerned about, because everybody has, everybody from a leadership standpoint, everybody thinks about risk in a variety of ways. I mean, you think about, what's the risk if I take the freeway versus the streets today when I drive to work, right? It's just, it's part of the way we think about things. From a product standpoint, or from any of the operational functions, they're thinking about these the various items that concern them, that to keep their job, to keep their process moving well. So one of the things I realized is, let's focus on finding out what those areas are. Then we can find a way to overlay the security into the areas that they care about. And then from there, you just repeat that pattern, and you realize that, oh, you know what, people want to do security. It's just we've been selling it wrong. We've been approaching it wrong. We've been making it super, super complicated when we really need to simplify it and remove all the jargon and stop talking about vulnerabilities, to a certain extent, and keep it more about, hey, here's a potential, risk to your product. Do you care about this? Right. And when you break it down that way, they're more likely to respond and to be helpful. And when you solve a problem for them too, they're more likely to be an advocate for you in the future.
So you come alongside them as a thought partner of how to make this better. And I think also we have a lot of air cover with that, because we are all subject to those data breaches that you talked about, right? Security has become incredibly personal, and it's not just some team back in a room trying to make sure that there's no bad actors getting in, right? We all have experience with what that looks like. So that must make a little bit of help as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point too, is when you can tie it to the personal side of it, because everybody's worried about their personal bank accounts and their personal systems.
Yeah.
So if you get people thinking about it from that standpoint, and that's something I've done in previous programs too, let's focus on security awareness for the home. And when you do that, they start thinking about how to protect their own assets. Then they realize, oh, wait, I just got to apply this to work now, to the assets I work on at work. And it feeds over really, really easily. It's easy for them to adopt those same topics at work as well. But it's harder when it's mandated from a work standpoint. But when you say, hey, wouldn't you do this on your own things? Then they start, kind of getting it, and they understand a little bit more. And again,
it makes it personal. Right. Yeah. And nobody, I think there's very few people out there who are developing software and trying to build great solutions that want to release it. It's just when we got other things to do. We have so much pressure in the system already. How do we make that trade-off and prioritize? And it sounds like you have a great way of coming alongside the business to make that happen. So my last question for today is the crystal ball question that I mentioned before we started recording. When you look ahead a few years, what worries you most about big data, AI, and security coming together? And on the flip side of that, what excites you most?
Yeah. So the things I'm, both excited about and worried about over the next couple of years are all centered on AI. I think from an AI standpoint, it's incredibly powerful for what it can, how it can amplify the work that you do, how it can accelerate those items. So I think that seeing what we're able to see, just the startups I've worked with and seen over the last, 6 months have been really, really promising, solving real problems and accelerating us. Now, on the flip side, I see the same thing happening from, a risk standpoint, right? We're going to see more types of attacks, at the model layer, at the agent layer. We're going to see more of that. And I would imagine, I can envision at some point we're going to have something, pretty serious happen, a major breach or something like that related to agentic AI. Because I think that's another thing. Everybody's going to be deploying these agents doing who knows what, right? Let's just, if they're integrating with like a finance application or something like that from a personal standpoint, they're going to have, some form of breaches. But then now, a business is starting to automate certain types of processes that are integrated into, their back office type things, payroll, something like that. And something catastrophic is, maybe not catastrophic, but something bad is going to happen. We're going to have a number of those things. And then, just like everything, I mean, that's happened, that's always happened throughout the course of security. And as I've seen in my career is, cloud had those kind of things, and you saw that with mobile, and we've seen that. I think we'll just see it probably a little bit sooner with AI. So who knows in the next, if it already hasn't happened and people just don't know, I definitely see that happening though. But I'm, like I said, I'm very bullish on AI. And I think, I believe strongly that the way we adopt it can be extremely beneficial. So I'm more excited about it than worried about it.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. I love the optimism. I think that that shines through from the thought partnership perspective of being very pragmatic about what we can solve and what we can't solve while prioritizing, generally keeping us safe. I love it. So as we wrap up today, what didn't I ask that you would like to share with our listeners? There was so much, and I have a whole list of questions. I didn't even get to a bunch of those, but what didn't I ask that you would like to share with our listener audience, or that you would think would be helpful for me to know?
I think I covered most. I think I had a little plug for a lot of different things that kind of my philosophy, but more about forming those relationships from a business standpoint, and making sure that security teams we shouldn't be adversarial. We should be there to help enable the business to do the right thing. We've got to make it easy for our businesses to actually do things the right way, do things the best way. Paved roads, things like that. To me, that's the key to success in security.
I love it. Making security easy so that it gets adopted, so that we can all be more secure every day in this great new world of AI.
The easier we make it, the
said.
more nights I can get some sleep. So.
Wouldn't that be nice? So listeners out there, increase and partner with your security organizations so that Josh and the rest of your security partners can actually get some more sleep. That is the call to action from today's podcast.
Love it.
Josh, where can people reach out to you if they want to connect and learn more and touch base? Is LinkedIn the best place to do that?
Yep. LinkedIn is the best place.
Fantastic. We'll add that to the show notes. And podcast listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Making Data Simple today, while we dove into there's no S in MCP and why that's a problem. Josh, I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom on security, leadership, and a little bit of a crystal ball into the future. Thanks very much for being on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me.